This next step involves removing the controller ports, the LED, the main power switch, the reset button, and these two heatsink holders. We won't be removing the power supply or the AV out port, because when we get to the board trimming section, those can actually be chopped right off with no need to remove them. So again, what makes this step much easier is if you have the proper desoldering tools available. For the money, these little one-step vacuum pumps do a very good job, and I prefer them over the braid. But again, the braid will work just fine. Or if you don't have either of those, you can potentially take these off with some diagonal pliers and cutters, or even if you're feeling brave, use the Dremel tool. Again, I don't recommend that because it is very easy to nick a trace or cause some sort of unintended damage as you're going through it. So if you got a vacuum pump, or even a manual one that uses a soldering iron and the pump, instead of having the 2-in-1 type deal, it really doesn't matter, just whatever you can use to suck that solder out. But the first thing I always like to start with are the controller ports, and because they have a little piece of mounting metal in behind them, I like to kind of start out with getting that, oops, jammed through my finger. Getting that pulled out and bent over a little bit so that when it comes time to pull the pins, you don't have this holding onto it. And so on the back side, the solder points we're going to be hitting, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 per controller port. So there's 8 total on this one and 8 total on that one. Now, a trick that I've learned that seems to help in removing these is, even if you have a vacuum pump, the grounding solder that they used on these boards is different from the the signal and power solder that they use. I don't know why, but it is far more resistant to heat and is a lot more difficult to remove unless you have a rosin-based solder coat already on it. Well, so I've got this warmed up already, but actually adding solder will make it easier to remove. So make sure it gets a generous amount on there. And then continue down the rest of the way. While you're at it, you might as well hit the LED pins, which are pretty easy to spot. These 4 bracket pins. And again, all these bracket pins use that ground solder, so this is kind of a pain. These 4 pins right here. Yeah, I'm not hitting these very cleanly right now, it's just an example. You want to make sure they're nice and clean. Yeah, that's a big blob. And then right over here is your power switch, which again, you're just going to want to hit all. There are actually 8 pins on the switch and then 4 mounting pins for a total of 12 that need to be desoldered. And then over on the other side of the board, you've got these 5 that need to be removed. And this center one is actually, I think, just a plastic alignment piece on the switch. So if you do melt this one down, don't be surprised if you see some black plastic underneath. And that is all we need to do as far as preparing them for desoldering. And then from here out, just hit all the pins that you tinned up. Setting it on there for a little bit until it starts to liquefy. Try to get it so you can see it. And you'll be able to tell which ones are ground pins and which ones are signal and power, because it will come up so much easier. And then just continue this process. And if you see some that look like they need to be hit again, you are probably going to have to go back and tin them, but just loosen them up as best you can. And go from there.